Welcome to Cyber Leaders with me, Ciaran Martin.
And me, James Lyne. Now, we're both from the SANS Institute who are kindly backing this podcast. I myself am a massive geek and I've spent my life making, basically everything hard for cyber criminals.
And I'm not a techie. I get in trouble for saying that sometimes, but I truthfully dealt with cybersecurity policy and operations in the UK government and set up its National Cybersecurity Centre. But together, James and I are trying to unpack the weird, wacky, wired and wireless world of tech security and all the complicated things that it involves.
That's right, Ciaran. This podcast is a voice for security leaders. We want CISOs, security directors, and everyone beyond to build up their knowledge of what works and what doesn't, and ultimately secure their organizations more comprehensively and quickly.
Indeed. Now, James, in terms of today's show, you know the way sometimes we struggle for both keeping to time and on topic?
It's been an issue once or twice, I would say, yes.
Once or twice? You could have got away with saying that on the third episode of the show as opposed to every one. But I'm warning you, today it's going to be an absolute disaster, just in terms of timekeeping and keeping on topic.
I'm glad you specified there. I was ready to rage quit the podcast immediately. But anyway, look, start as you mean to continue. May as well get into this point.
Well, today's guest is so accomplished and she can cover such a wide array of topics that it could take me the whole show just to introduce her.
Can you do brief, Ciaran?
No, absolutely not. You know that.
I did wonder if it was perhaps a self-professed skill that didn't manifest into reality, but maybe we can do something like put a book-length article about our guest on the show notes or the website or something. But anyway, do your best to introduce our guest and our subject in less than the 30-second takeaway we do at the end.
Okay, start the clock. We are joined today by one of my all-time favourite cybersecurity people.
I think, Ciaran, you've overachieved here. I mean, I overachieved at the expense of actual content.
Okay, I'll start again. Do I get my time back?
I'm feeling generous today, so clock reset. Off you go.
Okay, we're joined today by one of my all-time favourite cybersecurity people. She's a proper techie with loads of operational experience at A-list cybersecurity companies. She's a very accomplished writer, an entrepreneur, now with her own cyber company specialising in security for small businesses. She's a campaigner and advocate for, among others, women in cybersecurity and, importantly, for the legal protection of cybersecurity researchers. She's a scholar, a fellow of a world-leading think tank, and the first guest we've had on whose winnings are displayed on the World Series of Poker website.
Big fan of the legal protection of cybersecurity researchers. I've needed that in the past, but
I bet you did.
What was the last bit? Sorry, what?
I'm not repeating all this again.
Just the last bit, the poker bit.
Oh yes, this is a world-class poker player who's competed at the highest level in her spare time.
Maybe she can teach us a thing or two on the podcast, but we probably better meet her then.
Absolutely. It is my honour and privilege to welcome to the Cyber Leaders podcast, all the way from Seattle, Washington State, the one and only Tarah Wheeler. Hello, Tarah.
It is a joy and a pleasure to be with you today, James. Ciaran, thank you so much for having me aboard and for absolutely ruining my chances of walking into any poker game anonymously at a cybersecurity convention in future. Stop it. I need to make money.
Oh, oops. Didn't really think about that bit. Spoilers.
We're not known for our poker faces or voices. Sorry, terrible joke as well.
Yeah, I like that. That's a wonderful start, but I'm sure it's all just some kind of massive bluff. Anyway, look, thank you for joining us, Tarah, and welcome. You are right, Ciaran. We are going to struggle to fit all of this in, I can tell already.
I think we're going to frame it, first of all, around some of Tarah's new work on cyber war and how we think about cyber war, but more of that later. First, we have to get to know our guest a bit.
Absolutely. Well, look, Tarah, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. So a nice, easy one to start with. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you first got into the cybersecurity profession and your journey through the sector.
Well, I'm mostly not a felon.
Mostly
not a felon, I hope, at this point. So again, hi, I'm Tarah, and I'm here to help with your computer today.
Legally.
Legally, mostly legally. And that's at least part of the conversation we get to have today, right? Is what constitutes what we are legally allowed to do with computers has become a real struggle since the 1986 terrible U.S. law, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which I'm sure we can get into a little bit later on. But really, my job is on an everyday basis. I help people understand more about what's happening inside their computers, whether that's translating to a small business owner the nature of what's going on in cybersecurity, whether or not that's doing policy in Europe, whether or not that's contributing to cybersecurity thinking. But mostly every day, I'm a computer janitor. And I think I started that way because I'm a failed academic. I actually tried really, really hard to become a political science professor. And I got into the math side of things about 25 years ago. I started to get into international relations. I was busy doing case studies on North Korea and Russia. And I was working in international conflict and did a lot of programming and a lot of math. And now, 25 years later, having journeyed all the way through cybersecurity, I'm back doing case studies on North Korea and Russia again and doing international conflict. I suppose we can't really escape our pasts. But it turns out that if you do a lot of programming, then your skills can become valuable in a whole new way. So I think the reason I ended up in cybersecurity were a few coincidences. But the very first one was that the program manager who hired me at Microsoft maybe 15 odd years ago, I think at this point, out of that whole situation, mistook game theory for game design on my resume. And that's how I ended up at Xbox doing, web application security and community management and fora and web development and so forth. And just from there, it's been a journey of people misunderstanding my resume and letting me do things I have no business attempting.
Is game theory a prerequisite for working in game design?
Absolutely not. It is a prerequisite for understanding, I think, what's going on in our world. It's the lessons of expected utility theory. And understanding risk management is a practice like yoga that I do every single day in the work that I do. At its topmost expression, cybersecurity and nearly everything I do is an expression of understanding risk, which is really interesting to me.
And I can imagine quite useful for poker too, game theory, but we'll come back to both risk and poker. What was that piece of legislation you mentioned from 1986? The computer what?
This is the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act.
Right.
So anybody who in the United States enters a computer system without authorization can be subject to criminal prosecution.
Right.
The problem is that it's very difficult sometimes to understand both what constitutes entering a computer system and what constitutes authorization. So this law came about because a judge was convinced in 1986 that Kevin Mitnick could whistle nuclear launch codes into a payphone and start World War III. I'm not joking. What I'm hoping right now is that many of the people who are listening to this podcast were in fact born after 1986. I was not. The important point here is to just realize for anyone listening who's watched the magnificent movie War Games from 1983 with Matthew Broderick and Ali Sheedy.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
love it.
What a movie.
Complete and utter joy. Also, may I just say John Cook, absolute legend and a magnificent performance in Lady Hawk as well, but we can get into movies later. So imagine that a judge watched that movie and was convinced it was real. That's what happened in the United States. The perception that a hacker could use a touch-tone phone to launch a war was very, very real in the mind of the person who approved this legislation. So that's really the background for a lot of the work that we do in information security is almost never being sure that what we're doing is legal or that a prosecutor would understand that what we were doing was supposed to be legal and that we had permission.
Well, CFAA has been used for good and bad, hasn't it? It has been used as part of criminal prosecutions where you can look at it and go, yeah, that was right. And it's also been used offensively against security researchers, although at least it has a descriptive name. And we get into the Computer Misuse Act in the UK. I always think computer misuse sounds like something completely different that we won't get into for the sake of today. But it conjures up some interesting images, doesn't it?
James.
I mean, it does. It does.
I love science fiction. Keep talking, James. Let's go.
We'll ask AI to extrapolate later, won't we? And as a side, I mean, on this starting World War III with a payphone, I mean, who's to say that isn't how it all begins? Plot twist? I want to ask you one quick question, if I may, Tara. And I know we'll have to punch on to our many topics, movies, cyber war, and more. What's your favorite moment so far in your cybersecurity career? Have you had a kind of moment that just really made you smile or a moment you first realized, you'd love it? For me, Tara, it was that first moment of actually writing an exploit and seeing that you could trick a computer into doing something that it shouldn't. The you've got shell face that we all talk about in the industry, that. What's yours been?
I remember it. So I didn't know before 2012 that I was in the information security industry. I thought I was in tech. I wasn't connected to the larger industry in a lot of ways before 2012. And after a long story, I ended up at DEF CON in 2012 in that summer. It's the first time I really ever understood that there was this larger community of people that actually did this. And it wasn't just in the movies. I showed up there as a result of a business deal that I had made and brought a friend. We showed up the first day. And I feel like I was coshed over the head, dragged backwards into an alley and just told, you're one of us now, sister.
Wow.
It's what it felt like when I found that community. And I remember walking into Lockpick Village the first time.
One of us.
There's more. I walked into Lockpick Village. And I had met some incredible people. I joined a team, and I would come at the end of that DEF CON actually to win a black badge at DEF CON in the mystery challenge. I joined the right people and jumped in there. I was a mathematician. I could, do math and Chinese, which helped for the particular puzzles we were solving, just a couple other things. But I walked into Lockpick Village and I said, you could just do this? You could just pick up locks? You could do stuff too. Okay. All right. I picked up a lock and I went through the presentation. They'll give everybody like a 15-minute presentation on how to pick a lock, how they work, how does the pin tumbler system work in a regular lock. And I said, okay, I think I understand. I picked one up. I picked a 1-pin lock and I watched the keyway turn and I said, okay, that's open. And I set that one down. I picked up the one that had 2 pins in it and I picked that one and it took seconds and it turned and I set it down. And then I picked up a third one with 3 pins in it. I picked it and I watched the keyway turn. And then I raked the 4th one and I raked the 5th one. And the guy sitting next to me said, that's your house lock. And I felt every muscle in my body just seize. It's like I went numb everywhere in that moment. And I was holding this lock and I remember just staring at it in that moment of shock when you orient yourself.
Surely not. It can't be.
And I'm holding this lock and I went, oh, shit. And just deep in your soul, when you have that moment of realization how thin the walls are of security around you and how mostly security is just a feeling. It's an emotion.
A feeling often inspired by theater.
Theater, precisely. And so long story short, not only did that feeling happen, but about 4 years later, it turns out that the guy that invented Lockpick Villages, I would meet him at DEF CON shoot. And 2 years after that, I'd marry him.
I mean, who doesn't love a guy that could get into your house without your permission? It's just a classic opener, isn't it?
I'll tell you, dating somebody like that is quite an interesting experience. But more than that, try telling your daddy that you're dating a physical penetration tester.
Well, I'm leaving that one alone. Ciaran, what's next?
I think it's back to you because I am speechless. For the first time ever in the history of this podcast.
I don't believe you.
And between you and your husband, I mean, is there anything you cannot penetrate? Sorry. Physical or virtual?
It continues to be funny because the language is accurate.
Yes.
Because we have to use this language to describe physical penetration testing and digital systems.
And how we talk about cybersecurity has come up on this podcast before, but mostly in general terms about whether it's sensible to have salt and invoke Typhoon and so forth. We never had quite this conversation. And I promised we'd lose total control of this episode. And we absolutely have already.
I'm so glad.
Before I try to bring us back on track, I'm going to contribute to the failure. So the theatre, the movie theatre, quickfire question, war games or sneakers?
Sneakers. All day long, every single day.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
We'll put that on the show notes, what we're talking about. Then a clarification. You're not a failed academic. You're a very, very good one. You've taught in my classes at Oxford. You've studied, you've written and so forth. And pathetically trying to bring us back on track. This brings us on to the main topic about cyber war. So you're a fellow at the Council for Foreign Relations in Washington. You're a Fulbright scholar here at the University of Oxford, from where I'm talking to you, published a lot on all sorts of cyber subjects, including with the great Bruce Schneier, author of the delightfully named Click Here to Kill Everybody. You've co-authored stuff with him on the vulnerability of weapons systems. And now you're working a lot on cyber war. You've got a major presentation at the renowned Cyber WarCon event coming up. So, long prelude to give you a break, calm things down a bit, to asking you, Tarah, cyber war, what is it good for?
Absolutely nothing.
Say it again, and then I'll rephrase it. Tarah, what is cyber war?
It is a method of conventional warfare. It's a tactic like any other, and there's a reason it's becoming part of the repertoire of modern warfare, and why we are beginning to consider it part of conventional warfare, as opposed to the one thing we don't consider conventional warfare, which is nuclear war. I think about this topic maybe more than is entirely healthy. And I don't know that there's an amount of thinking about warfare that could be considered healthy, I'll be honest. But I know that the question of cyber war has come up so repeatedly, not only what is it and what does it constitute, but whether or not it's real. And that maybe is the interesting question to me.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of different definitions of warfare, and I'm not going to dig too deeply into the semantics of the situation. I think it's understood that when a country engages in hostile action against another country that involves the loss of life of its armed and unarmed citizens, that we are looking at something that could probably, under somebody's definition, be described as warfare. And we have absolutely had those moments using just a computer so far. I think there's a real challenge as we step into more and more interconnected systems of scholars being boiled frogs when it comes to their definition of cyber war not happening.
So when you think about those type of examples, you said we've already had examples of computer-related aggression, however you want to put it. Are you thinking of any in particular?
I am always going to be thinking of WannaCry. Not only is it the one that I know academically best, but I personally was an incident responder to it, and I've spent a great deal of time doing research on it. And I'm personally, emotionally connected to it in a meaningful way. But for those who need to remember what WannaCry is, and just in case you don't remember,
Ciaran is very keen to forget, actually, I think, Tarah. It's a triggering moment.
I love talking about WannaCry. As you know from your research, I love it.
I do. And as a slight disclaimer, not only do I know Ciaran, but I want to say that in my research, I need to express how deeply grateful I am, not only for the conversations you and I have had when I was at Oxford doing the research for my Fulbright, the conversations that we've had have helped magnificently in my own understanding of what happened on May 12th, 2017.
Well, thank you. If I was going to spend time talking to anybody about the worst days of my career, it was a pleasure that it was you. So thank you.
I'm grateful for that. And at the same time, there's a meta level to this conversation, which is that a lot of people have talked to me about WannaCry, and I've talked to a lot of people about it. So May 12th, 2017, just a brief summary, North Korea launches a cyber attack against the United States, which ends up harming the United Kingdom far more than the United States. So that day, we saw the United Kingdom essentially have two of the major portions of the National Health Service fundamentally break down all the way. For nearly 3 weeks, this happened. Red screens, for those of you who might remember, your computers were turning red that day. The news just had a lot of pictures of very red computer screens. It looked like a ransomware attack. It wasn't. It was something we think probably was launched by the Lazarus Group in North Korea. It's interesting in cyber warfare, and I want to get into the concept of perfidy a little bit later on, but this was a state-backed cyber attack against the United States, and it hurt people in the United Kingdom. We think actuarially there was about 13,500 canceled appointments. Multiple people lost their cancer treatment appointments. Systems completely shut down. Medications couldn't be gotten to. Surgeries were canceled. And I have spoken to at least 2 experts on actuarial science in the United Kingdom who estimate that 300 people died as a result of WannaCry, either as a direct result or far earlier than they would have because they received no medical treatment and they needed it at the time. So the answer to your question, Ciaran, what is cyber war, is when a country attacks another country and people die. That's war, and I don't care what label we put on the front of it.
So a couple of things on this. I mean, you mentioned WannaCry, the cancelled operations, obviously very difficult, and people have disputed views as to what extent the direct link between cancelled operations and deaths and so on applies and so forth. But in the age of, say, Volt Typhoon, the threat to critical infrastructure is getting better. So what needs to change to prepare ourselves better for cyber war, however defined? And is it on the offensive side? Is it on the defensive side? What needs to change?
I think that it is mostly the defensive side that needs assistance. And I think that there is a lack of vision right now in the United States about what constitutes a defense against cyber warfare. Mostly because I think Chris Krebs called them the cyber 1%, which is a fabulous way to put it. The people and organizations at the very top level who can defend themselves quite adequately and who can even contribute to offensive operations. And then, as the brilliant Wendy Nather said several years ago in the Atlantic Council, the concept of the security poverty line, which is organizations that don't have the capability, the funding, the capacity, the influence to protect themselves. They don't understand or have capacity to defend themselves. And this is the equivalent of getting ready to draft a country into a war where everyone is massively out of shape and has never seen a gun before. This is a defensive element. And it's one of the reasons I care about this topic, because most of the people who are going to be impacted by cyber warfare, by the tactics in warfare that are constituted of using a computer to hurt people, are people that are never going to see it coming, haven't heard anything about it, and have no defenses against it. And the answer is very simple: cyber hygiene for the 99%. It genuinely is that people who are being attacked, who are being farmed by APTs for their money and their computer space and their time, and their $500 to $1,000 at a time in small businesses, they're the ones that need the most protection, and they have the least of it. And the recent cancellation of CISA's state and local services, of the move now to take away federal coordination for American small businesses when it comes to external cyber campaigns and pushing it to the state and local level. Well, I mean, it may be great for my personal business, but it's a terrible move for the country. It's an absolutely awful move. And just because I saw it coming doesn't make me any happier about it.
Yeah, great answer. And you mentioned some of our favorite people: Chris Krebs, former head of CISA, along with the redoubtable Wendy Nather of Cisco, who we should have on this podcast. So thank you. James.
I'm curious, Tarah, it's a really difficult line to walk, isn't it? Because You don't want to say, hey, cyber war is coming. World War III is, going to start with a call from a payphone or pages are relevant again now. I was about to joke about that, but of course, highly relevant this year.
Mhm.
You also, don't want to downplay it to the degree that people think it's just a risk and fraud problem and that there isn't the opportunity for, cyber attacks to support kinetic operations in the military or to have significant national security impact. How do you think about walking the balance between these two, kind of using the hype for good, but not overplaying it to the point where people disengage? How do we calibrate this?
That's a difficult one. And my bright line is one where the physical world in a meaningful way that a person can touch is damaged. I've had a beautiful couple of conversations with consumer public safety commissioners in the United States and Australia. And what they're afraid of, when we talk about safety as opposed to security, they're often concerned with things that involve temperature of things like sous vide machines and baby milk warmers and refrigerators and freezers and home heating and the ability to maintain a human being at a comfortable temperature. Embryo storage is a pretty good example. So when we talk about the ability to hurt someone with a computer, there's hurt your feelings, there's damage you in a financial sense, and then there is harm your physical being. James, Ciaran, yesterday, my stove was swapped out and the new stove has an app.
Oh no, shouldn't you know better?
I swore loudly when the lovely gentleman pulled up yesterday and said, just scan this QR code on the front of your stove to control it. You could turn the oven on from your bed. And I said, yes, but so can the Chinese.
North Koreans. They'll ruin my pasta.
Yes.
My puttanesca will never be the same again.
And just note that I think the line that I walk is when a physical system is damaged or harmed. One of the ways we can tell Russia attacked Ukraine was the attack in the fall and winter of 2016 that took out the power grid and heating systems of homes in Kiev, right? That is something that hurt people. Physically, it hurt them. That is, to my mind, the bright line that I walk when it comes to giving this definition. I can clarify more, James, but I feel like that's as good a definition as I can give by saying that we can hurt people with a computer in a real and meaningful and predictable way now that we didn't used to be able to do. And that scares me.
Yes, indeed. One little thing I want to touch on, and then I know we've got to move on to some of our other topics, Ciaran, or we're going to fail to get through even more than one with Tarah, let alone how we're going to win poker matches, which is, of course, is hugely important. Tarah, Volt Typhoon, Salt Typhoon, and so on. Of course, in some of this early discussion of cyber war, we've focused on the life and limb impact or having kind of kinetic impact. And by that classification, one could jump over some of this more espionage-related stuff. I think that's right. The word war should be used with great precision. But talk to us a little bit about your view of those types of campaigns. I get the sense they're escalating in scale, complexity, and brazenness compared to years prior. But maybe we just got better visibility. What do you think?
I am fascinated by the topic. And, Ciaran and I have had a wonderful in-print disagreement before, which I absolutely loved. And I want to disagree with you in print more, Ciaran.
Anytime.
Over the topic of ransomware payments to criminal and state actors. And at the same time, I was roaring with approbation, Ciaran, when you published that article, I think it was a week ago, maybe a week and a half ago now, that really analyzed the difference between Salt and Volt Typhoon. I'm interested in Volt Typhoon right now. And the reason for that is the quantity of implants in U.S. critical infrastructure. When I say implants, I mean direct Chinese military action against American civilian critical infrastructure. There is just shit sitting in networks everywhere. And the interesting thing to me is that to the best of my knowledge and ability to tell, I do not have a classification, so I can't provide any information on it. But that means I'm free to speculate, which is great. I've not heard, and I believe the Biden administration confirmed this in a report that came out this last year, there's no implants, as far as they can tell, in healthcare.
They did.
Exactly. Do you know what that means? It means that in the event of warfare, they are planning on abiding by the Geneva Conventions and the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, which says you cannot attack a civilian healthcare installation. This is preparation for specifically
Supply chain attacks surged to 245% from 2023 to 2024. And breaches like the Oracle Cloud breach, GitHub Action supply chain compromise, and vulnerabilities such as Log4j have proven just how one compromised supplier can disrupt thousands of organizations. Whether you're looking for comprehensive training, expert-led webcast, or ready-to-use templates and frameworks, the new SANS Supply Chain Security Hub has everything you need to secure your supply chain, from development to deployment. Explore our resources at sans.org/supply chain.
Warfare, because they're going to abide by the International Criminal Court and the Geneva Conventions.
Wow. Fascinating. Absolutely right. The conspicuous by its absence was healthcare. Perhaps not only are we losing track of time, we asked those questions in the wrong order because first up, we might have gone to the scary threat, and Typhoon is probably, as we mentioned kindly, the article I wrote, probably the scariest cyber threat we've had in recent times, certainly in terms of the disruption of infrastructure. And then all those good ideas about what we need to do about it on the defensive side. Tarah, we could talk about cyber war and these related issues all day, but that would be a waste of your many talents. There are so many other things you're passionate and deeply involved in, to name a few. The vulnerability of vulnerability researchers. See what I did there? Women in tech, cybersecurity for small businesses. So in the spirit of trying to draw things together, all these things, is this about an interest in the bits of cyber that involve the risks to people who might feel marginalized, pushed to the sides of our consideration of cybersecurity outside the self-declared mainstream? Is that fair, or am I trying to impose a pattern where none exists? Or is it really a theme of cyber war broadly defined and not as we know it? What do you reckon?
I think that you've put your thumb on the thing that gets me up in the morning and gets me in front of the computer all day long, which is that there are a lot of people that don't have a connection to and don't understand what's going on in this world. And there are a lot of people that don't have the power to affect it. There are people who have a passion and a joy in finding out the vulnerabilities and the security holes in our world, but they themselves are vulnerable to a larger system. And the through line, I think, in everything that I do is that I end up translating back and forth between policymakers and small business owners and vulnerability researchers and the people creating policies that can target them or help them. I'm always just translating back and forth to try to make people understand each other better in this world. And especially to understand the reality of the risks that they face. Sometimes people don't have a very good metric or understanding of the risks that they're taking, and they don't understand the potential impacts of their choices. And it matters a great deal to me to try to keep people safe. I think that I and so many other people in cybersecurity and information security, we're not here for the money, because there's no money that can pay us for giving up our lives and our time and our stress and the stomach lining that I used to have and the ability to see the world in an uncomplicated way. There's no money that can make up for that. But the mission to keep people safe, that can get people out of bed in the morning. That's what keeps us all going, I think. And it's not necessarily just me doing that. I think it's that I feel like I'm part of a community of people that do that. And that's where I get the inspiration from.
Makes a lot of sense. It is interesting, isn't it? Lots of us fall into this because of cool little moments with technology, little, like offensive skills, I could do that. And then before long, you're part of this surprisingly altruistic, mission-connected community that actually just wants to make things better. Like, I love hacking stuff. It's fun. But you kind of develop this deep connection to wanting to reduce risks for organizations and help people use technology more securely. And over time, the kind of grander connection to the realization that all this technology is going to be the supporting pillar of all of our future lives in bigger and bigger ways. And that just isn't going to go very well if there isn't more digital trust and risk management. But let's unpack this a little bit. So let's turn to small and medium-sized businesses. We obviously talked to a lot of security leaders who are in larger organizations. But, your company, Red Queen Dynamics, great name, by the way, specializes in cybersecurity for this kind of area. And now you don't have to advertise Red Queen. You can if you want. I've advertised an entirely fictional company on this podcast, after all. Threaty McThreatface, now available 50% off for this next month. But just tell us a little bit about the dynamics, as it were, for small businesses. I mean, they get battered by cybercrime. They're vulnerable in the event of a major escalation of cyber conflict between great powers stuck in the middle. They carry a lot of risk. And if something bad happens to a lot of them, that's a national security issue, or at least a significant economic issue. So why does it prove so hard for small businesses to do cybersecurity? I mean, they have a smaller surface area in theory compared to a large enterprise. Why is it harder? What are they trying to do?
Absolutely. It's an interesting one. So 44% of the U.S. Gross domestic product comes from small businesses. And small businesses are 99.7% of businesses in the United States. So Why do we not pay close attention to them? Well, the answer, at least in part, is it is incredibly difficult to get cybersecurity training and competent assistance to small businesses at the right price and the right scale. James, I am an extremely expensive human being, and there is no way for a small business to justify even 2 hours of my time, which would be insufficient to solve most of their problems. We have to find ways of scaling and bringing together small businesses at the training level, at the state and local level to get them the kind of assistance that they need. Cybersecurity is expensive. The people that I know, it's difficult to buy their time when you can afford them. There's not enough people in cybersecurity coming to help. And as a result, even at the very largest side of American businesses, there's a cybersecurity talent and hiring shortage. So imagine how tough it is for small businesses to get any kind of competent help. The best way I can put it is for small businesses in the United States, there's no one coming to save them. I watched a friend's accounting firm, not his accounting firm, but the accounting firm that he went to, he knew the owner. The owner told his friend, a friend of mine in security, that he'd been hacked, that there'd been a data breach, that there'd been a ransomware event. And because this was in Colorado, there was a privacy notification, a breach notification in Colorado that you have to abide by as any business. This lifestyle accounting firm owner, probably 60 years old, 30 people that he employs, probably 3,000 to 5,000 high net worth individual tax returns and businesses that he was protecting. Do you know what he did when he first received the notice that he'd been breached, that there'd been a ransomware event at his company? Do you know where he went for help?
Tell me more.
He called the local police station.
I'm sure that went superbly.
It's very common because he was the victim of a crime. He thought he needed to report it.
Yeah, the thought process makes sense, for sure.
This is a very common response on the part of small business owners and people who have been victimized by cybercrime. We already know, everybody listening to this podcast already knows what the response was. Well, who did it? I don't know. Well, unless you can show that they're in this jurisdiction, I can't go arrest them, so I can't do anything about it. What do you want me to do about it? And the business owner says, but what do I do? And the police officer says, I don't know, call your insurance company. That's the response most of these businesses are getting. It's not only getting harder and harder for cyber insurance to be issued to a small business, but the people that we serve, Red Queen Dynamics creates a product for small businesses to report their risk and report how they're doing on cybersecurity with simple questions to their managed service provider. Managed service providers are the backbone of IT services in the United States. These are the small businesses themselves which provide things like account management, and technical help, and support and IT assistance to most of the small businesses in the United States. And they themselves are often small businesses really struggling to try to make it work. So we created a product, and I don't need to advertise this. I'm telling you that the market is here and not being served to help small businesses actually tell the people that can help them what's going on with them. Skipping entirely past that, the reason that this needs to happen is because there's nobody coming to help these small businesses. Law enforcement is overwhelmed already with what they think of as real crime. And the inability of these business owners and of just people in the United States to protect themselves is getting worse, not better. I mean, I could speak about it passionately, but it's not really passion I'm feeling right now. It's anger. I'm angry about it. Angry about it enough to spend my time, my really expensive, angry time trying to fix this problem because it's heart-wrenching to watch someone lose their life's work when they've been targeted by an APT in another country and they've lost a few $1,000s, sure, but then all their business, all their data, all their clients are just gone. 60% of small businesses that experience a breach like that in the United States will be out of business within a year. You can't tell me that's not a potential national security crisis rolling along slowly, like the jackpot in science fiction.
That was hugely powerful. Let's talk about another aspect which involves your passion, sometimes your anger, and law enforcement, which is security researchers. We mentioned earlier another group of potentially vulnerable people. Now, you've done a lot of campaigning on this. You even, and this is well known publicly, intervened personally after WannaCry when the hero of WannaCry, Marcus Hutchins, was arrested in Las Vegas. Very controversial case, very controversial within the cybersecurity community. And you, publicly available story, were in Las Vegas in a courtroom sprinting to make sure that bail was posted and so on. That's just one of the many examples of your passionate campaigning and intervention on behalf of cybersecurity professionals. So what led you to get involved in those issues? And where are we now on this subject? What would you like to see change?
That has become less and less a political question to me and more a personal question to me. And it's an interesting one, but it's also almost a little hard to answer. I think the answer was that I saw something wrong. And in that moment, I was in a position to do something about it in a way other people weren't. And there are other people who have stepped in to help and save me when I needed it. And I've always told people that you don't need to go back and pay someone back. There is a pay it forward ideal out there, but maybe it was just I saw a kid who didn't have anybody to help him. And it was heartbreaking. And I had a chance to fix a thing. And there's so few things we can fix, Ciaran. There's so few things that we can reach out and put a hand on and personally solve. And it's a long story. Everybody can go take a look at it. I mean, this kid, Marcus, is family to me. I mean, when I was in the UK, Ciaran, and I was talking to you over a Zoom because, we were all stuck in that lockdown for 4.5 months in early 2021. Marcus's mom has now kind of become my UK mom. And we talked nearly every day. And she sort of saved me and sent me hampers and now they're family. And so I think open your heart up a little bit to maybe helping people that could be family. But more than that, if you can fix something, do it.
Yeah, and hugely powerful intervention. But also, I think it is worth noting there is a wider issue here politically about the protection of researchers and some very forceful interventions on that. So we'll leave that there. Brilliant and very powerful story. James?
Yeah, a couple more pieces here. And then I know we need to start to wrap up, even though we could keep going all day. But more generally...
You'll have to come back.
Exactly, part 2. As well as, all your scholarship, you've got a lot of frontline industry experience. You're head of offensive ops and data privacy at Splunk, very important company to name, but what are those experiences? So with your journey through this industry, from a capability point of view, what's getting better? What's still bad? What's getting worse about the cybersecurity profession? Give us a bit of a landscape view. You're allowed to be cynical or positive as you might see fit.
I am gratified to see that cyber risk is surfacing at a board level at this point.
Yes.
Cybersecurity engineers, like I started as a Linux systems administrator, and understanding risk means if you can translate it well, you start to float up to talk to the people who understand risk inside organizations. And ultimately, that ends you up, like I have ended up at this point, as an audit committee member on boards of directors. You end up as somebody who is doing risk audit and governance on boards, because that's the corporate function cybersecurity needs to float up into. And I think 2 things are really helping with that. First, several of the SEC regulations over the last couple of years have actually contributed very positively to boards having to pay attention to cyber risk, including needing to add it to your 8K. But I think that the real manifestation of that is now every single CISO I know is demanding that they be put on D&O insurance before they will take the risk of heading the information security organization inside a publicly traded company. I think that's incredibly important because it begins to acknowledge that there is a director and officer level responsibility on the part of cybersecurity. This isn't something trivial and tiny any longer. It is fundamental and existential for companies. I think that insistence that a CISO get put on the D&O insurance, just like every other director and executive for the company who has personal responsibility for it, that's a key element of change over the last couple of years.
I like those items for sure. I suppose the bit I wish was getting better was the kind of average resilience and security and what you described with small businesses earlier. Although in fairness, I think a lot of it has got better. The problem is the other adversary side has too. So there's kind of escalating need. But let me take you somewhere else here before we wrap up. Something you did much earlier in your career, nearly a decade ago, was write a very well-received book called Women in Tech. Take your career to the next level, practical advice and inspiring stories. But more seriously, what brought you to that? What does the book kind of say? I know I'm now asking you to summarize an entire book in 30 seconds. And now, kind of 10 years on, what's the position? Have we made some progress?
There's good news and bad news. The good news is that I still get people telling me that this has mattered to them, because I wasn't trying to write a guide to diversity. I was writing a career guide for women who needed to understand how to make money. Genuinely, if you want to empower women, just pay them better. Literally just look at their salaries and make sure that they're getting paid the same as the men around them. And I think that message is really carried through in a lot of ways that has mattered to people. The bad news is it's getting probably statistically worse at this point in cybersecurity and in most technology. The issues that we're seeing in US culture are, I think, harming the ability of women to succeed at the topmost levels of companies, and it is making it more difficult for them to succeed. We saw the top number of women in technology in 1984, and the number has steadily declined year over year since then. And while there are women who are entering the pipeline, they fall out of it at every single level of their careers at a dramatic rate. So the answer is both good and bad. There's more insistence on equal pay. So the women who do make it are compensated well. And I recommend for women still to join this field, but I am more advised about it now. And that's a hard thing to say, but I told you I would tell you the truth.
Appreciate the truth and work to do, but progress being made is a reality of where we are.
Yeah.
Look, Tara, we've covered so much and a lot more we could, of course, talk about. But Ciaran, I think we have to bring things to a close or our editor's going to get two crooks out and drag us off the virtual stage.
Yeah, true. But we will do the 30-second takeaway. Of course we will. But Tara, just quick question. Should elite poker skills be an entry-level requirement to our profession? Or are you just good at it anyway for a laugh?
Oh, good. I like it.
The capacity to play a game again and again and understand that it is iterated. There's no such thing as playing poker for one single hand. The act of playing poker is a practice of trying to make slightly better decisions over time with calculations of risk and understanding your opponents. It's like going to the gymnasium for somebody who is in cybersecurity. That is the way I would probably put it.
We're getting two bits of advice. One is on poker as a guide to cybersecurity and life skills in general. And as I've said, you're on the World Series of Poker website. But secondly, we are coming to the end, so we cannot forget James's favourite bit of the show.
It is indeed. Look, Tara, we ask people to listen to us. We share anecdotes. We go through our stories, much of which, of course, they enjoy greatly. But we've got to give them something useful and actionable, not just enjoyable at the end.
So we are asking you for
your 30-second takeaway. Tara, as I said, this podcast is about lessons for cybersecurity leaders. So if you had just 30 seconds with a cybersecurity leader, what would you advise them? It could be something to pay attention to more now than usual, something to ignore, something you really think they've got to get into their budget or stop doing or start doing, you name it. You get 30 seconds to really draw attention to something in this industry that you think matters. Whatever you like. When you're ready, we'll start the virtual timer for 30 seconds-ish.
Okay, start the clock. The answer is that cybersecurity leaders are fundamentally both alone and representatives of a larger community. So if you are a leader in this industry, build your analogies, because you can't use tech speak to speak to executives and people everywhere. Build your analogies right now. Be better at explaining to people what is happening inside your organizations and inside this industry. I don't care what analogies you use. I don't care if it's sports. I don't care if it's cooking. But don't tell people what technology is. Tell them what it's like so they can understand it well enough to make decisions, as opposed to try to learn what it is you do for a living. That's the most useful thing you can do. There's your 30 seconds. Also, get more sleep and stop drinking so much.
Great health advice as well on there. They help with the poker as well.
I might pick one of those two.
I mean, that's 50% success. I mean, that's above a third. I'm looking forward to some analogies that are a hybrid of cooking and sports. I think we could have some real fun with that. But I think that's great advice. And for those listening now, remember to whip back to, the great Shashank Joshi from episode 1. Jeff White, a great cyber explainer who had loads of advice on how to do the type of thing here Tara is describing. It's just such an important skill, isn't it, Ciaran?
It is. And Tara, thank you so much. An outstanding guest. An honor to have you.
Thank you so very much. I want to let people know it's been a joy not only being on this broadcast with you. Thank you so much, James and Ciaran. I'm looking forward to seeing you all in person, if at all possible. I'm the closing keynote for CyCon this year, talking about cyber war and so forth. For those of you that can't make it to Talent, if I see you in Vegas at Hacker Summer Camp this year, come play the EFF poker tournament with me. Let's support some vulnerability researchers if we possibly can.
Although I believe, as per every year, it is cancelled.
It's cancelled this year too.
But if you can't get to Talent, Estonia, do watch that presentation online. It'll be great.
Wonderful. Well, I guess, Ciaran, that's it.
Apart from feedback, of course.
Always important. Yes, guests you'd like to hear from, topics you think matter, problems you're worrying about. We do, after all, do this for you and making your life easier and making life harder for the cyber criminals, although we do have a lot of fun on the way.
We do indeed. So leave us feedback at the podcast site or email us at cyberleaderspodcast@sans.org. Tell us anything you want.
So with that, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for listening and keep cybering. So for me, Ciaran Martin.
And me, James Lyne.
It's goodbye.